The future of Black language is not just a conversation about words, dialects, or pronunciation. It is a conversation about identity, memory, dignity, and the unshakable truth that a people cannot rise to their highest potential until they reclaim the sound of their own voice. For generations, the languages of African people were pushed aside, silenced, or reshaped to fit systems that were never built for their empowerment. Yet something remarkable has always remained: the rhythm, the tone, the cadence, the creativity, and the power that no force on earth has ever been able to erase. When we talk about reclaiming what was lost, we are talking about more than vocabulary. We are talking about a spiritual and psychological rebuilding, a cultural awakening, a return to the foundational codes that shaped the minds, communities, and civilizations of African people long before the world recognized their brilliance. Black language in all its global forms, from Swahili to Yoruba, from Twi to Zulu, from Pidgin to Creole, from African American vernacular English to Afro-Caribbean speech patterns, has always carried the heartbeat of endurance, wit, resilience, and innovation. Even when languages were banned, mocked, or dismissed, they never died. They adapted. They survived through rhythm, through song, through storytelling, through jokes, through proverbs, through whispers, through memory, through generations who held on to pieces of their identity, even when the world insisted they had none. And today we stand at a turning point where the future of Black language is no longer about survival. It is about reclamation, restoration, revival, and global recognition. To reclaim Black language means to reclaim the right to define oneself without apology, without fear, and without shrinking to fit the expectations of anyone else. For too long, African languages and Black speech patterns were labeled as broken, incorrect, uneducated, or inferior. Young students were taught to hide their accents, to silence their mother tongues, to believe that fluency in a colonial language was the only measure of intelligence. But history has always told a different story. The very languages that were dismissed have been shown to carry some of the most complex grammar systems, the richest poetic structures, the deepest symbolic meanings, and the most advanced storytelling traditions in the world. What was called broken English by some was actually a linguistic code crafted from survival and creativity. What was called slang was actually a cultural evolution that blended centuries of African linguistic memory with modern innovation. What was called improper speech was often a system of communication more expressive, more efficient, and more layered than the languages used to judge it. Reclaiming Black language means reclaiming the truth that nothing about African communication has ever been inferior. It has always been powerful, expressive, and deeply rooted in genius. The future of Black language will be written by those who understand that language is not simply how we speak, it is how we think. When a child grows up speaking a language that reflects their culture, their values, their worldview, they grow up grounded, confident, and connected to something larger than themselves. But when they grow up speaking a language that teaches them to distance themselves from their origins, they grow up feeling like strangers to their own identity. This is why reclaiming language is reclaiming the mind. It is reclaiming the ability to see the world through the lens of one's ancestors, to reconnect with the natural intelligence that shaped kingdoms, philosophies, and systems long before the modern world existed. African languages carry ways of thinking that are communal, ethical, relational, and spiritually grounded. They teach respect, humility, wisdom, and patience. They teach that a person is not defined only as an individual, but as part of a community, a lineage, a shared responsibility. When these languages fade, those values fade. When these languages return, so does the strength of the people. The future of Black language also belongs to technology, education, and global influence. Today, African languages are entering universities, digital platforms, translation apps, artificial intelligence systems, literature, film, music, and classrooms around the world. The sounds that once lived only in villages, communities, or neighborhoods now travel across continents in seconds. Young Africans are creating content in their mother tongues and reaching millions. Afro-diasporic speech styles are influencing music, fashion, social media, and global culture at a scale never seen before. What was once suppressed is now celebrated. What was once hidden is now shaping global identity. What was once looked down upon is now being studied for its brilliance. This is a moment of linguistic revolution, but revolutions only succeed when people recognize their power. Reclaiming what was lost means teaching young people the history of their languages, not as a relic of the past, but as a tool for the future. It means allowing children to speak their mother tongues at home without shame and learn them in school without punishment. It means creating spaces where African languages are used in science, law, technology, business, and diplomacy, not only in poetry or culture. It means valuing African American vernacular English and global Black dialects as legitimate linguistic systems with rules, structure, and history. Not slang to be erased, but a form of expression to be respected. It means encouraging the diaspora to reconnect with the languages of the motherland, even if it's one word at a time, because every word is a piece of the soul returning home. It means recognizing that language is wealth, and any community that loses its language loses a portion of its power. The future of Black language will be built through unity. A continent with over 2,000 languages does not need to erase difference to unite, it needs to elevate understanding. The dream is not to force one language on everyone, but to create bridges. Bridges between dialects, between regions, between countries, between Africa and its diaspora. This unity begins with respect. When a man respects the language of his neighbor, he respects the identity of his neighbor. When a woman honors the speech of her ancestors, she honors the strength within her. When a community embraces its linguistic diversity, it embraces its collective intelligence. Language is not a barrier, it is a connect. And Africa, perhaps more than any other place on earth, has the ability to show the world how powerful linguistic diversity can be when guided by unity and purpose. Reclaiming Black language is not about going backward, it is about moving forward with clarity. It is about building a future where African languages are preserved like treasures, spoken like music, and taught like essential knowledge. A future where no African child ever feels embarrassed by the sound of their parents' accents, where no student ever believes their voice is less intelligent because it carries the rhythm of their ancestors, where no community ever abandons its language in the pursuit of acceptance. True acceptance begins within. When a people accept the sound of their own voice, the world is forced to listen, and when the world listens, it learns. The future of Black language is a future where African speech becomes a source of global inspiration, where proverbs shape policy, where storytelling shapes education, where rhythm shapes communication, where linguistic heritage shapes innovation, where accents are no longer corrected, they are celebrated, where the words once whispered in fear are now spoken with pride, where the voices that were once silenced now echo across the world with confidence, authority, and purpose. Every language carries a world within it, and the Black world is ready to be spoken again. This is the moment when we begin to rebuild what was stolen, recover what was hidden, revive what was fading, and reclaim what was always ours. Language is more than sound, it is memory, it is history, it is identity, it is power. And the future of Black language is a future where African people speak boldly, proudly, and unapologetically in the voices that were meant for them. The world has heard Africa speak through music, culture, art, and spirit. Now it is time for the world to hear Africa speak through its language. When that happens, the world will not only listen, it will change. And when Black people reclaim their language, they reclaim themselves. What you speak shapes what you become, because language is never just sound. It is the invisible architecture of the mind, the quiet force that shapes how you see yourself, how you interpret the world, and how you move through it. Long before anyone writes your story, you begin writing it through the words you use, the meanings you attach to things, and the rhythm of expression that becomes the signature of your identity. When you reclaim a language that was taken, broken, or buried, you are not simply reviving old words. You are reviving the memory of a people, the dignity of a culture, and the confidence of a lineage that once walked with unshakable certainty. Many do not realize that every language carries a worldview, a philosophy, a set of values encoded in its structure, its greetings, its proverbs, its humor, its silence, and even its unspoken rules. To speak a language is to inherit a way of thinking, and to inherit that way of thinking is to inherit a way of being. That is why reclaiming Black language is not about nostalgia or tradition. It is about identity reconstruction, cultural healing, and personal empowerment. When a people lose their language, whether through force, shame, suppression, or assimilation, They lose more than vocabulary. They lose metaphors that taught them to be courageous, sayings that reminded them to stay humble, and ancestral wisdom that helped them navigate life long before maps, textbooks, or institutions existed. They lose the emotional connection to their past, the cultural codes that shaped their unity, and the mental frameworks that once gave them the freedom to dream beyond borders. And while people can survive without these things, they often survive in fragments, carrying only pieces of themselves while believing something essential is missing, but not knowing what. This is why reclaiming Black language is reclaiming identity. It reconnects the broken pieces, restores the inner compass that colonization tried to erase, and returns the sense of belonging that displacement tried to scatter. Reclaiming Black language does not only refer to ancient tongues like Yoruba, Igbo, Twi, Wolof, Amharic, Swahili, Zulu, or Congo. It also refers to the rhythms and speech patterns that survived against all odds, carried into new worlds by people who were stripped of everything except the sound of their own voice. It refers to the creative brilliance in African American vernacular English, in Caribbean Creoles, in Brazilian influences, in Afro-Latino street dialects, and in the coded languages born on plantations, in resistance movements, in underground spaces, and in cultural rebirth. When the world said Black people had no language, they built new ones. When the world tried to silence them, they made their silence loud. When the world broke their tongues, they created new music in the way they spoke, new poetry in the way they expressed pain and joy, and new meaning in the way they communicated identity without permission. To reclaim Black language today is to embrace all these forms: ancestral languages, survival languages, reclaimed languages, and evolving languages. It is to understand that language is a living organism that grows, adapts, resists, and reinvents itself, just as a people do. It is to recognize that speaking your own linguistic truth is not an act of rebellion but an act of restoration, dignity, and self-ownership. When you speak the way your people speak, when you pronounce names the way they were meant to be pronounced, when you resurrect proverbs even if they sound old-fashioned to others, you are quietly declaring that you know who you are and where you come from. That declaration is powerful in a world that thrives on erasing origins. Language is also the foundation of unity. When a people share a common tongue or reconnect with their linguistic roots, barriers fall and communication becomes deeper, richer, and more authentic. This is why reclaiming Black language is essential for rebuilding Black identity, not just individual identity but collective identity. Without understanding the linguistic threads that weave Black cultures together, it becomes harder to build continental unity, diaspora solidarity, or a shared cultural vision that transcends geography. Reclaiming Black language creates bridges between Africans and the diaspora, between elders and the youth, between tradition and innovation. It reveals that there is more connecting Black people than separating them, more shared memory than forgotten history, more roots than branches. When you reclaim your language, you reclaim your story. You reclaim the metaphors that used to empower you, the idioms that used to guide you, and the humor that once helped your ancestors survive unimaginable hardship. You reclaim the mental frameworks that taught your people resilience, cooperation, patience, boldness, and deep spirituality. You reclaim the cultural codes that taught communities to protect one another, to respect elders, to honor their ancestors, and to value wisdom over wealth. You reclaim the pride that comes from knowing your people had grammar before Europe did, had writing before the West knew what literacy meant, and had elaborate communication systems long before modern linguistics existed. The world may have distorted that story, but the language you speak, when rooted in truth, corrects the distortion. And the most important part is this: reclaiming Black language is not about rejecting modernity or isolating identity. It is about expanding identity, enriching it with layers that were intentionally stripped away. It is about giving yourself permission to grow into your full humanity, not the edited version society tried to impose. It is about understanding that you can speak global languages while still honoring your ancestral ones. You can move through the world with excellence while never forgetting the rhythm, tone, and wisdom that shaped your people long before borders existed. Your voice carries an ancient memory, and when you awaken that memory, you awaken a strength the world cannot contain. What you speak shapes what you become, because language is your first form of power. It is the tool your ancestors used to survive, organize, resist, dream, love, teach, and build. When you reclaim Black language, you reclaim all of that power. You reclaim the parts of yourself that history tried to silence. You reclaim the fullness of your identity, and once a people reclaim their identity, no force on earth can stop their rise. A people who recover their tongue, recover their power, their memory, and their direction, because language is not simply a tool for communication. It is the heartbeat of identity, the map of a people's journey, and the invisible thread that ties generations together. When a language is lost or suppressed, it is not just words that disappear. It is an entire worldview, the wisdom carried in proverbs, the lessons hidden in idioms, the beliefs embedded in grammar, and the culture reflected in the rhythm of speech. To recover a language is to recover the essence of who you are, the story of where you come from, and the confidence of where you are meant to go. When a people begin speaking in the woes that belongs to them, they unlock inner parts of themselves that had been sleeping, covered, or silenced by time, struggle, or outside forces. Language does not simply describe identity. It restores it, strengthens it, and reawakens it. Every word in an ancestral tongue carries the fingerprints of a people's journey, their victories, their traditions, their humor, their struggles, and their triumphs. That is why reclaiming a lost or forgotten language feels like rediscovering something familiar, something deeply rooted even if it was once buried beneath the weight of history. It is like seeing your reflection clearly for the first time after years of viewing yourself through fogged glass. The moment you speak a word your ancestors spoke, you connect directly with the generations that lived before you, and you feel a sense of belonging that no textbook, no document, and no foreign interpretation can give you. That connection is the beginning of empowerment, because a person who knows where they come from becomes grounded, anchored, and unshakable. Power returns when language returns, because language governs how you think, how you interpret the world, and how you define yourself. Colonizers knew this, which is why one of the first acts of domination was to silence tongues, rename people, erase old scripts, and punish those who spoke in their native rhythms. They understood that if they could break the language, they could break the spirit. They understood that a people who cannot speak in their own voice will eventually forget their own strength. But history also shows something else. No matter how much pressure is applied, a language tied to identity never dies completely. It hides in songs, in whispers, in nicknames, in childhood games, in dances, in accents, in borrowed words, and in the creative expressions of a people determined to survive. When that language is revived, even in fragments, the memory of the ancestors comes alive again. Memory returns not only in the mind, but in the soul. A proverb spoken today carries the same truth it carried centuries ago. A greeting exchanged in an ancient tongue still contains the respect, warmth, and cultural values embedded in it from the beginning. When people sing old chants, repeat old phrases, or bring back forgotten names, they awaken the memory that colonization tried to bury. That memory becomes fuel for identity, clarity for purpose, and direction for the future. People who know their own story are no longer easily misled because they walk with the confidence of someone who can trace their roots. Direction also becomes clearer when language is restored, because language tells you how your people once saw the world. It reveals what they valued, what they avoided, what they celebrated, and what they feared. It teaches lessons without lectures. It carries moral codes without laws. It holds philosophies without needing school. Reclaiming language means reclaiming a worldview that was shaped by thousands of years of experience, wisdom, survival, and innovation. When you speak that worldview, even in modern form, you move differently because you now carry the mental blueprint of your people. You understand life through the lens of heritage, rather than through the lens of those who once controlled the narrative. For Black people across the world, on the continent and throughout the diaspora, this restoration of language means reclaiming the unity that displacement attempted to break. Even when different communities speak different tongues today, many of those languages share roots, structures, meanings, and concepts that reflect a shared origin. From Niger-Congo to Afro-Asiatic to Nilo-Saharan languages, you can still hear echoes of ancient connections that time could not erase. And even the languages born in the diaspora, Creoles, Pidgins, African American Vernacular English, carry the rhythms, tones, and expressions of the mother tongues from which they sprang. To reclaim these languages is not to erase modern identity, but to enrich it, strengthen it, and anchor it in truth. People who recover their language also recover their pride. The shame that was once taught falls away, replaced by an understanding that their languages are some of the oldest, wisest, most expressive systems the world has ever known. They begin to see that their ancestors were not voiceless, not primitive, not empty. They were thinkers, philosophers, inventors, storytellers, and builders of civilization. And that realization builds confidence, because you cannot see your ancestors as extraordinary without recognizing that you came from that same lineage. Their greatness does not diminish with time, it lives through you, especially when you reclaim the voice that once carried their greatness. Reclaiming language is not about going backward, it is about moving forward with a stronger foundation. It is about giving the next generation something pure to stand on, something authentic to grow from, and something powerful to carry into the future. It is about ensuring that identity is not shaped by those who once tried to destroy it, but by the people who inherited it. It is about knowing that your voice carries more than sound, it carries history, legacy, strength, and direction. And once a people reclaim their tongue, they reclaim the authority to define themselves, the courage to rise again, and the clarity to walk boldly into the future that belongs to them. The future of Black greatness begins with the courage to speak in the voice the world tried to silence. Because every step toward reclaiming language is a step toward reclaiming identity, power, and place in history. When a people lose their language, they lose the map that guides them back to themselves. But when they begin to rebuild that voice, the world begins to hear a truth that was never truly gone, only buried. For generations, Black communities across the world have carried a brilliance that survived even when their words were stolen, suppressed, or mocked, and yet the spirit of expression remained unbroken. Now the future demands something bold, the willingness to rise, to speak, to rebuild what was lost, and to shape a new narrative grounded in pride, knowledge, and unshakable self-worth. Language has always been more than communication. It is memory, culture, worldview, rhythm, and strength. It is the thread that connects the living to those who came before. When you reclaim your language, you are not just learning words, you are reviving the technology of your ancestors, the wisdom embedded in tone, pattern, proverbs, metaphors, and untranslatable truths. The future of Black language rests on the willingness to appreciate that the dialects, accents, slangs, and indigenous tongues, often mocked by outsiders, hold deep intellectual systems that the world is only beginning to understand. Every sound carries history. Every phrase carries resistance. Every expression carries an origin story. To embrace these languages is to say, my heritage deserves the same respect as any system that ever shaped the world. Across continents, from Africa to the Caribbean, from America to Europe, the Black voice has traveled through storms, survived separation, fought invisibility, and still learned how to rise. But the future calls for more than survival. It calls for restoration. It calls for generations to step forward and say, we deserve to remember who we are, because the greatest tragedy is not forgetting, it is believing that what was lost can never be rebuilt. It can, and it must. There is no power stronger than a people who recover the language that once defined them. A reclaimed language becomes a shield and a foundation. It becomes the soil for confidence and the path toward unity. A people who know the worth of their voice cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated, and cannot be erased. This future requires courage because reclaiming language challenges centuries of conditioning. Many were taught that their accents were inferior, their expressions uneducated, their mother tongues uncivilized. But greatness was never measured by how closely you resembled someone else's standard. Greatness has always been measured by how fully you embrace your own. To reclaim language is to break the cycle of shame and replace it with dignity. It is to understand that the future is not built by imitating those who took your voice, but by amplifying the voice they tried to take. When a young Black child grows up hearing languages spoken with pride, Swahili, Yoruba, Twi, Zulu, Igbo, Wolof, Creole, Patois, Ebonics, something powerful happens. They stop shrinking themselves to fit into a world that rarely knows how to celebrate them. Instead, they grow into the world on their own terms. The future of Black language also demands education, not just in schools, but in homes, communities, and digital spaces. It means teaching the next generation that language evolves but should never dissolve. It means building systems where Black languages are preserved, digitized, studied, and elevated globally. It means creating art, films, speeches, books, and music that honor ancestral sound. It means recognizing that every dialect formed in struggle is a masterpiece of creativity, adaptability, and cultural survival. If the world can celebrate other cultures for their linguistic richness, then surely the world can and must acknowledge the sophistication in the languages born from African hearts. Reclaiming what was lost does not mean rejecting the present, it means strengthening the future. Black people across the globe already influence global culture through music, style, creativity, and innovation. But the next level of influence will come from intellectual ownership, owning the language that shapes thought, identity, and connection. A future where Black languages thrive is a future where Black children grow up with confidence, where communities speak without apology, where the world learns the names, expressions, and philosophies that history tried to erase. It is a future where unity is no longer a dream but a living reality shaped by shared linguistic pride. The future of Black greatness truly begins with the courage to speak in the voice the world tried to silence, because the moment you reclaim your language, you reclaim your history, your pride, and your direction. You become the author of your own story. You become the echo of your ancestors' dreams. You become the voice that carries a continent into the future. And no force on earth is powerful enough to silence a people who finally decide to speak in the language of their truth.